She sang one song at a stranger's wedding, and it changed everything. A powerful CEO froze in his seat, captivated not just by her voice, but by the woman behind it. What followed was a love story full of second chances, quiet dreams reignited, and a proposal that will leave you breathless. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss the next unforgettable story. Claire Whitman never imagined she'd be the center of attention at someone else's wedding, especially not with a microphone in her hand and 400 guests staring at her like she was the bride. The sun was just starting to dip beneath the horizon, casting a warm golden hue over the sprawling garden. Strings of fairy lights flickered above, dancing gently in the early evening breeze. Claire stood beneath the floral archway, her lavender dress whispering against her legs as her fingers tightened around the microphone. The piano began to play, a soft, aching melody that echoed like something long forgotten. Her stomach clenched, but she remembered what she had promised her best friend, the bride. Just one song, for me, please. So Claire sang. The notes weren't perfect. Her voice cracked once or twice. Her breath caught in places she wished it hadn't. But there was something in it. Truth. That kind of raw, unpolished honesty that hits deeper than technical perfection. Her voice trembled at first, then grew steady, swelling with every word until the garden grew still. Conversations faded. Champagne flutes paused midair. People turned to look. Except one man didn't just look. He leaned forward in his seat, like the music had gripped him by the collar. Grant Mallory sat halfway back, his whiskey untouched. He'd arrived late, slipped in quietly like he always did when the social event didn't concern a merger or a press release. He didn't know the woman on stage, hadn't caught her name. But something about her voice, about the way it wavered and then stood its ground, caught him off guard. It wasn't just a performance. It was a confession. Honest, raw, vulnerable in a way Grant hadn't seen in years. He couldn't clap when the song ended. Everyone else around him erupted into applause. The bride was dabbing her eyes. Some of the guests were already standing. But Grant just sat there, hands frozen, something inside him stirring that he hadn't allowed to surface in a very long time. He didn't understand it, but he knew one thing clearly. He had to find out who she was. Meanwhile, behind the tent, Claire was trying to remember how to breathe. Her heart was racing, knees still weak from the adrenaline rush. She had done it. She hadn't choked, she hadn't run. Just as she reached for a glass of water, a voice broke through the haze. "Hey, sorry to sneak up on you," a warm, friendly voice said. Claire turned to see a woman around her age, dark curls pinned back neatly and a kind smile stretching across her face. "I'm Julia," the woman said. "Groom's cousin. I just wanted to say, you were incredible. I think you made half the crowd cry, including the bride, twice." Claire let out a shaky laugh, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Thanks, honestly, I was trembling the whole time." Julia handed her a cold bottle of water. "Well, maybe you should tremble more often." There was a guy in the audience who looked like he'd seen a ghost, or maybe the love of his life. Claire rolled her eyes, laughing nervously. Highly doubtful. But later, when she returned to the reception and the dancing had started, she scanned the crowd. Not for him. Not really, but maybe just to see if he was still there. Just once. Her eyes flitted across the lantern-lit garden, past couples swaying gently to the music, past waiters carrying trays of wine. Somewhere near the back, a tall man with sandy blonde hair stood near a row of ivy-covered columns, speaking to no one. She blinked. Their eyes never met. And then he was gone. Grant hadn't lingered. He didn't make a scene. He posed for a few polite photos with the groom, an old college friend, and then slipped into the back seat of his black sedan. He had a 7 a.m. strategy call the next morning, something with Singapore and the Berlin office, and normally that would be all he thought about. But not tonight. As the car wound through the quiet streets of the city, the lights of downtown casting gold across his windshield, all he could hear was that voice. Soft, vulnerable, defiant, singing in a room that never expected music. By the time he reached his penthouse, he'd already made the call. "Find out who performed at the Everson wedding tonight," he told his assistant. "Yes, Mr. Mallory," came the crisp reply. He hung up without another word, then stepped into his high-rise apartment with its glass walls and silent echo. Everything in his life had always been curated, calculated, controlled. But tonight, for the first time in a long while, something had slipped past all that. And it sounded like her. Claire was shelving a stack of new arrivals when the bell above the bookstore door chimed. A soft, familiar sound that usually meant a customer looking for a quiet escape or a second-hand mystery novel. But the man who entered didn't browse. He walked in with purpose, dressed in a tailored black suit that seemed entirely out of place among the dusty shelves and creaky floorboards. "Claire Whitman?" he asked, voice calm but unmistakably authoritative. She looked up from the cart, half expecting someone to jump out and yell, "You've been pranked." "Yes," she answered cautiously. The man offered a sleek, gold-embossed card. "My name is Nathaniel. I represent Mr. Grant Mallory. He'd like to invite you to dinner." Claire blinked. "I'm sorry, who?" "Grant Mallory," he repeated. "CEO of Mallory Holdings. He attended the wedding you sang at last weekend." Claire let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Is this a joke?" "It isn't, Miss Whitman. Mr. Mallory heard you sing. He'd like to meet you properly." She stared down at the card in her hand. It had weight, the kind of card you didn't throw away. Her name wasn't on it, but somehow it felt like it was meant for her. "I'm just a bookstore clerk," she muttered. Nathaniel offered a small smile. "And yet, here I am." 2 nights later, Claire stood outside a restaurant she'd only ever admired from the street. The kind of place where the valet didn't wait for tips and the menu didn't list prices. She wore her nicest dress, borrowed from her roommate, and her nerves were dancing a waltz in her stomach. Inside, the hostess greeted her by name and guided her to a candlelit table by the window, overlooking the city like it belonged to someone else. Grant was already seated. He stood when she arrived, sleeves casually rolled, no tie, but still managing to look like every polished cover of Forbes she'd never dared to read. "Claire," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming." She shook it, her confusion still barely masked. "You really went through all this trouble because I sang a song?" "I didn't just hear you," Grant replied, gesturing for her to sit. "I saw you, and I haven't stopped thinking about you since." She laughed awkwardly, reaching for the water glass. "That's a lot." "I don't do halfway," he said simply. The waiter arrived, so smooth and silent it felt like a magic trick, and Grant ordered steak for himself and sea bass for her, along with a bottle of wine she couldn't pronounce. It was the kind of dinner she had once imagined reading romance novels at the register, the kind she never thought would be hers. Conversation was stilted at first. Claire fidgeted with her napkin, self-conscious about her thrift store clutch and second-hand shoes. Grant, though intimidating, surprised her. He was direct but warm, curious in a way that felt real, not rehearsed. He didn't ask about her resume. Instead, he asked why she worked at a bookstore instead of a music studio. "I used to dream about studying music," she said. "But dreams don't always pay rent." Grant listened like no one ever had, really listened. Not the kind of nodding people do while waiting for their turn to talk, but a quiet, focused stillness that made her feel seen. He told her about his company, how he inherited it at 19 after his father's sudden death. He spoke of pressure, public scrutiny, and long nights of trying to fill shoes 2 sizes too big. "My mom left when I was 10, he said softly. "Some days I'm still not sure if she was ever really there. It teaches you early how to stay 2 steps ahead." Claire leaned back, her fork paused over a perfect mound of risotto. "That's a lot to carry." He gave a half nod. "It forces clarity. You learn what matters fast." She didn't know what to say, not right away. It wasn't the kind of dinner conversation she expected, not over crystal glasses and candlelight, but it didn't feel like a performance. It felt like the beginning of something she didn't quite understand. "What about you?" he asked gently. "What made you stop singing?" She glanced away. "I didn't stop. Life just got louder. Music became something I did in the background." "You could do more," he said. "A lot more." Claire felt the edge in her voice rise before she could soften it. "Not everyone can just leap into opportunity, Grant. Some of us are still paying for our past." He didn't flinch. "I know. I'm not some cause you can sponsor," she said, eyes narrowing. "Is that what this is, a project?" "No," he said, quieter now. "This isn't about saving anyone. I want to know you, and that includes what you left behind." She looked down at her plate. Her voice was small. "I didn't leave it. I just put it on hold. until it stopped hurting. Grant didn't reply right away. He simply nodded, then said, "I can't fix your past, Claire, but I can make room for you to dream again." Their eyes met across the flickering candle. Something flickered there. Not trust, not yet, but the beginning of it. When dinner ended, he offered her a ride home. She declined, insisting the subway was fine. He didn't press, just walked her to the elevator in silence. Before the doors closed, she turned to him. "You don't scare me, by the way. I didn't think I did. You want too much, too fast, but that's not what scares me." She took a breath. "I'm scared of wanting it too." He didn't smile. "Then let's take it slow," he said. She nodded. The elevator doors closed. The next morning, Claire found a black box tied with a white ribbon at her door. Inside were 2 front-row tickets to a sold-out performance at Harmonia Hall, by a soprano she'd once written about in a journal no one else had ever seen. Somehow, he had known. The box felt too elegant for her small apartment. Claire turned it over in her hands, the white ribbons silky beneath her fingers. She wasn't used to gifts, certainly not ones that looked like they belonged in a museum display. Inside were the tickets, front row, Harmonia Hall. The name of the soprano printed in elegant script was enough to make her breath hitch. This woman, Renata Ilvani, had been Claire's North Star during sleepless nights in college, her voice a reminder of the life Claire once believed in. She had written about her once, scrawled a note in a faded journal she carried everywhere, back when hope still felt like a choice. She hadn't told Grant. That night, Claire sat in the audience, heart pounding in rhythm with the overture. She wore a floor-length gown borrowed from her best friend, shoes half a size too big, and a deep sense of disbelief. Music poured through the hall like it had been waiting just for her. By the second act, tears slid silently down her cheeks. It wasn't just the voice. It was the reminder that music didn't vanish. It waited. And someone had reminded her how to listen. After the final curtain, as applause thundered around her, Claire turned toward the aisle. Grant was standing there, not at the edge of the stage but a respectful distance back, watching only her. "You came?" she said softly, dabbing at her eyes with the back of her hand. "I wanted to see your face when she sang," he replied. "I never told you about her." "You didn't have to," he said with a shrug. "I saw a line about her Milan performance in your journal. It was open." She froze. "You read my journal?" "I read one sentence," he said gently, "and I remembered it." They walked outside into the cool night air, the city humming softly beneath their feet. Grant reached into his coat and handed her a pale gray scarf, cashmere, unfamiliar. "This isn't mine," she said, fingers curling into its warmth. "I had it sent here after dinner," he said. "Figured you'd forget a coat." Claire laughed under her breath. "You're not very good at being normal." "I'm not trying to be." For a moment, they stood in silence, just 2 figures beneath the glow of the marquee. She looked up at him, equal parts wonder and wariness. "You're not what I expected. Neither are you." Her pulse fluttered, traitorous and honest. "I can't fall for someone who lives in the sky." "Then I'll come down," he said. "Just say the word." And for the first time since the wedding, Claire didn't feel like a girl on the outskirts of someone else's life. She felt like a woman standing on the edge of her own beginning. 2 weeks later, she walked into the Mallory Foundation headquarters for the first time. The receptionist greeted her by name before she could even introduce herself. A man in a navy suit escorted her to the top floor. And when the elevator doors slid open, Grant was there, leaning casually against the edge of his desk, phone in hand, but his eyes already waiting for her. "You're early," he said, slipping the phone into his pocket. "I didn't want to be late," she replied, smoothing her blouse, suddenly hyper-aware of every thread. "Though I might have overdressed." "You didn't." The office was stunning. One wall was entirely glass, overlooking the city skyline. A long conference table stretched to the side, and behind his desk, the walls were lined with framed photos and subtle, intentional art. There was a sense of balance in the space, beauty that wasn't meant to impress but to belong. Claire sat across from him, folding her hands in her lap. "I wasn't expecting an invitation to your office," she said. "I thought we were still pretending this was casual." "I'm not pretending," Grant replied. "I wanted you to see what I'm building, not the company, the real work." He reached into a drawer and slid a folder across the desk toward her. Curious, Claire opened it. Inside were photographs, some polished and professional, others candid and blurry. Children and music classes, community centers filled with laughter and rhythm, handwritten thank you letters in crayon. And at the top, a title, the Mallory Youth Arts Initiative. I started it 6 years ago, Grant said. It doesn't generate returns, doesn't get media coverage, but it matters. Claire turned the pages slowly, her throat tightening. You're funding music programs, in schools that lost them, and community centers, orphanages, places where creativity was the first thing cut when budgets got tight. She paused at a letter from a little boy who had just received his first cello. It sounds like how the sky feels, he had written. Why are you showing me this? She asked, voice barely above a whisper. Because I want you to help me grow it, he said. Design the next phase, expand it. You understand music in a way my team never could. Claire looked up startled. You want me to work for you? I want you to help lead this. You need it as much as I do. She stared down at the folder, hands trembling. I'm not qualified. You're perfect for it. She shook her head slowly. What if this changes everything between us? Grant stood and walked around the desk, settling on its edge beside her. It already has. Her breath caught in her throat. You're serious? I don't offer things I don't mean. Claire closed the folder with deliberate care. This isn't just about music, is it? No, he said quietly. It's about you, and what happens when you stop standing on the sidelines. The room fell into a charged, beautiful stillness. I'll think about it, she said at last. Grant smiled, not with pressure but patience. Good, he said. Think fast. Claire said yes the next morning. Not because of the generous salary or the sleek new laptop that arrived on her doorstep less than 24 hours later, but because something in her had shifted. For the first time in years, she woke up with purpose, like she was walking toward something real, not just trying to survive the day. And though she didn't want to admit it, part of that something was Grant. They didn't define what they were, not exactly. Grant didn't hover. He wasn't the kind to micromanage or send cryptic texts when she stayed late at the office. But he had a strange instinct. He always knew when to call, when to leave a cup of coffee on her desk without saying a word, or when to challenge her just enough to push her forward. They worked side by side, falling into rhythm not through labels or promises, but shared moments that built into something deeper. A month into the role, Claire found herself rewriting the proposal for a new outreach program in Queens. Her apartment was dim, the glow of her laptop casting soft light across the coffee table. She had just saved the final draft when her phone buzzed. Grant, there's something I want to show you. You free tonight? She glanced at the time. It was nearly 8 p.m. Sure, but I'm in jeans and a sweater. You'll be fine. He wasn't wrong. The gallery wasn't a formal venue. Not tonight. Tucked between a florist and a wine bar in Soho, the small studio space was empty, except for a quiet man adjusting the lights at the back. Grant greeted him with a handshake, then gently guided Claire to the center of the room. What stood before her stopped her breath cold. The painting was massive, 7 feet tall, framed in dark, unfinished wood. It showed a woman standing at the edge of a wind-blown shoreline, her hair tangled by the storm, eyes closed, mouth open as if singing into the chaos. The colors were wild, restless, the brushstrokes urgent, alive. She reminds me of you, Grant said softly, beside her. Claire didn't answer. Couldn't. Her voice was caught somewhere deep, buried beneath the quiet awe building in her chest. The artist's name is Varela, he continued. He paints women he's never met, visions, feelings. People wait years for a commission. She turned to him slowly. You bought this? I commissioned it, Grant said. Her brows lifted, stunned. When? 3 weeks after the wedding. Claire blinked, overwhelmed. You didn't even know me. I knew enough to want the rest. Her eyes burned. She looked at the painting again, not just with admiration, but as if it was a piece of her pulled onto canvas. Rowan, she started, then paused, correcting herself. Grant? He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. But he didn't open it. I've spent most of my life trying to control everything, he said. My company, my image, my heart, and then you walked into that wedding and sang like no one had ever told you to be quiet. He stepped closer. You didn't perform. You didn't try to impress, but you had every eye, including mine. You had me. Claire's breath hitched, her heart stumbling in her chest. "You didn't just impress me," he said, voice low. "You undid me." And then, finally, he opened the box. Inside sat a single emerald-cut diamond set in platinum. Elegant, simple, unmistakable. "I'm not asking you to give up your music," Grant said. "I'm asking if I can be part of the song." Claire stared at the ring, then at him, and in a move so deeply hers, so rooted in quiet confidence, she reached into the box and took the ring herself. No big speech, no drama, just her sliding it onto her own finger with deliberate, steady hands. Grant exhaled, almost laughing, stunned. "That's a yes?" She smiled softly. "That's a yes." They didn't kiss right away. Instead, they stood there, two people who had been living at the edges of their lives, now standing in the center of something new. When their lips finally met, it wasn't rushed or showy. It was reverent, honest, like something sacred was being promised in silence. That night, Claire didn't go home, but they didn't rush anything. There were no declarations, no urgency. Just two people, sitting on the rooftop terrace of his penthouse, sipping wine, wrapped in shared silence and quiet laughter. She leaned her head against his shoulder, feet curled beneath her, and whispered, "Promise me something?" Grant turned slightly, brushing a loose strand of hair from her cheek. "Anything. No matter what changes, we keep choosing each other, even when it gets messy." He kissed her temple, holding her a little tighter. "Especially when it's messy." The city below kept moving. The lights never blinked. But up there, in that quiet room above it all, nothing else mattered. They weren't just a CEO and a singer anymore. They were partners in a song still being written. 4 months later, the rooftop garden at the Lyric Pavilion bloomed under a canopy of soft golden lights and late spring twilight. Claire stood just beyond the terrace, barely breathing as the sound of a string quartet floated through the air like silk. Below her, the city glimmered, sharp glass and quiet motion, and around her something extraordinary was unfolding. The launch of the Mallory Youth Arts Initiative expansion wasn't just an event, it was a milestone, a movement. And Claire Whitman's name was printed beside Grant's on every banner, every program, every invitation. She hadn't known about that part until the day before. He'd kept it a surprise. Typical Grant. The moment was surreal. Not long ago, she was shelving books and borrowed cardigans, wondering if her life had already been decided without her. And now, this. A national tour, fully funded music programs in over 30 schools, a scholarship fund with her fingerprints all over it. Somehow she'd stepped from the edge of her dreams into the very heart of them, and they had made space for her. She heard him before she saw him. "You're late," she teased without turning. Grant's voice came from just behind her, low and warm. "I was making sure the soundboard was working. You'd be surprised what chaos a single faulty mic can cause." Claire turned, heart skipping at the sight of him in a navy tuxedo, crisp and flawless, except for one rebellious curl at his temple. Her favorite. "I already checked the soundboard," she said with a half smile. "They fixed it." "Of course you did," he murmured. "You asked me to run the program. I asked you to run it, not wear yourself out." She raised a brow. "Are you suggesting I relax?" "I'm suggesting," he said, holding out his hand, "that just for tonight, you let someone else take care of things." She hesitated, only for a moment. Then she placed her hand in his. They stepped out onto the terrace together, a quiet hum of conversation turning into applause. Not for him, not this time. But her. The guests, donors, educators, artists, even a few celebrities, parted gently as she walked. Claire felt it like a soft wave breaking around her. Admiration, respect, recognition. Her feet slowed. Grant leaned in, his breath warm against her ear. "You earned this," he whispered. "Every second of it." She swallowed hard, emotions rising in her throat. The MC called her name. Before she could fully process it, she was under the spotlight, standing before hundreds of expectant eyes. But when she gripped the microphone this time, her hands were steady. "I used to think music was something you had to chase alone," she began, her voice clear. "Something that disappeared when life got too loud. But I was wrong." She glanced toward Grant, who stood just outside the circle of light. "Music doesn't leave," she said, softer now. "Sometimes it just waits for someone to hear it again. And because of this program, because of every person here tonight, thousands of students will get to hear it, maybe for the first time." Her gaze returned to the crowd, eyes shining. "If I've learned anything, It's that the right people don't just hear your voice, they make space for it. The applause that followed wasn't explosive, but it was real, full. It wrapped around her like a promise. Afterward, the terrace transformed. The air turned electric with laughter and music and the clinking of glasses. Nothing formal, nothing rehearsed, just joy, pouring out like champagne. Claire moved through the crowd, hugging volunteers, thanking teachers, laughing with young musicians who had flown in from Detroit, Charlotte, San Diego. Their excitement was infectious, and for a while she let herself forget to be cautious. Near the bar, she spotted Grant deep in conversation with an elegant woman in a crimson gown, her silver hair swept into a perfect chignon. Every inch of her radiated power and grace. Claire didn't interrupt. She waited. When Grant noticed her, he gently excused himself and crossed the floor. "Are you hiding?" he asked, voice teasing. "I'm recharging," she replied. "Come with me." Before she could ask where, he took her hand and led her through a side hallway and up a spiral staircase she hadn't even noticed before. At the top, the door opened into a glass-walled room, still and quiet, suspended over the city. At its center stood a grand piano, bathed in soft light. Claire stepped in slowly, reverently. "This feels sacred," she murmured. "I bought this building 3 years ago," Grant said behind her, "and I left this space untouched. I didn't know why at the time." She turned to him. "I think you did." He pulled something from his jacket pocket, a small velvet box. Her heart caught. He didn't open it. Not yet. "I've built everything in my life around control," he said quietly. "Every move, every word, every risk calculated. But you, Claire, you broke through that. You reminded me what it feels like to want without a plan, to feel without needing a safety net." Then he opened the box. Inside was a ring, simple, elegant, clear. "I'm not asking you to give anything up," Grant said. "I'm asking if I can be part of whatever you build next." Claire stared at him, her chest aching with the kind of fear that came right before hope. "You didn't need a rooftop to do this," she whispered. "I didn't want to do it anywhere else." She picked up the ring, held it, then with trembling certainty slid it onto her own finger. "Yes," she said, her voice quiet and sure. "That's a yes." He pulled her into his arms, and when they kissed, it wasn't for the crowd or the moment. It was for the life already unfolding, quietly, truthfully, note by note. Behind them, the city shimmered. Below them, music carried on. But in that small room above it all, 2 people stood still, exactly where they were meant to be. "Thank you so much for staying with us until the very end of Claire and Grant's story. Your time means everything, and if this story touched even a small part of your heart, we're truly honored." At its core, this story reminds us of something powerful. Sometimes, the things we've buried, our dreams, our voice, our belief that we deserve more, are still quietly waiting for us. All it takes is one moment, one person, one decision to start again. Whether you're 18 or 80, it's never too late to be seen, to be heard, or to begin again on your own terms. We'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below and share your city or country with us. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new video. We have many more heartfelt stories coming your way, stories that inspire, uplift, and remind us that healing, hope, and love can arrive when we least expect it. From our hearts to yours, thank you for being here. She said yes to a man in a wheelchair, but what happened at the altar left the entire crowd in tears. A secret training, an impossible vow, and a moment that defied every expectation. This isn't just a love story, it's a miracle in motion. You won't believe what he did when the music played, and she walked toward him. Where are you watching from? Tell us in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful true stories like this one. Claire Hadley wasn't looking for anyone. Not that rainy Tuesday afternoon, not in that dusty corner of the town's oldest library, and certainly not after the year she'd had. Divorce papers barely dried, a career shift looming like a gray cloud, and the silence of a home once filled with laughter. It was enough to make even the brightest smile fade. So she went to the one place that never asked her to pretend, the Rosewood Public Library. It smelled like old pages, fresh coffee, and quiet hope. She wandered past familiar rows of biographies and dog-eared paperbacks, letting her fingers trail along the spines like greeting old friends. That's when it happened. A thick hardcover, shelved a bit too high, teetered and dropped toward her. She reached for it instinctively, but someone else caught it first. A pair of calm, weathered hands intercepted the fall. She turned, startled. Sitting there was a man, late 30s maybe, with dark, thoughtful eyes and an old, worn-out wheelchair that looked as much a part of him as the coat he wore. He handed her the book, his lips curling into a half-smile. "This one's heavier than it looks." Claire blinked. "You caught that like a pro," he chuckled, voice low and warm. "Been catching falling things for a while." She smiled before she realized it. "Claire?" "Daniel," he replied simply. No fanfare, no awkward stares, just a name passed like a quiet handshake. They stood, well, he sat, facing each other for a beat longer than strangers usually do. She nodded and moved on, heart beating faster than it should have. But she didn't make it far before curiosity tugged her back. Over the next week, then 2, then 3, Claire found herself showing up more and more. Always the same section. Always near the same time. And almost always, Daniel was there, by the tall window overlooking the park, a book in his lap and headphones in his ears. Sometimes he hummed softly. Jazz, she thought, or maybe old folk songs. Eventually they spoke again, this time about the author he was reading. Then about libraries. Then about life. He wasn't a talker, not the rambling kind. But when he did speak, his words landed like poetry, measured, meaningful, and just a little melancholy. He told her about his love for Ray Bradbury, how fiction let you rewrite endings. She listened. Then, to her surprise, she spoke. She told him about her grandmother, about writing letters to her late mother she never mailed, and how some nights she sat on the porch alone because silence felt more honest than company. He listened, really listened, and never once tried to fix her. That's what caught her off guard. No advice, no pity, just presence. The kind of presence that reminded you you weren't broken, just tired. It was a few weeks in when she asked him gently, "What happened, if that's okay to ask?" He didn't flinch. He closed the book in his lap, folded his hands. "Car accident, 3 years ago. Drunk driver, spinal cord injury." He said it like a fact, not a tragedy. Then he added, almost as an afterthought, "I was lucky to survive. Some days I believe that, some days not so much." Claire didn't offer a platitude. She just reached across the space between them and touched his hand. "I'm glad you did." From that day on, things shifted. Their talks grew longer, their silences even more comfortable. Claire's best friend Maggie noticed the change before Claire admitted it herself. "You've got that look," Maggie said over brunch one weekend. Claire rolled her eyes. "What look?" "The one people get when they're about to do something that scares them." Claire didn't argue, because she knew Maggie was right. Falling for someone again wasn't part of her plan. And falling for someone in a wheelchair, that came with questions. From others, from herself. But not from Daniel. He never once asked her to save him or make him feel whole. He was already whole. Bent in places, yes, but whole. Claire once told her grandmother Evelyn about him. Evelyn, a fiery 74-year-old with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, listened quietly, then said, "If he makes you smile with your eyes, not just your lips, then he's worth keeping." That night, as Claire sat on her porch with a cup of chamomile tea and Daniel's voice in her head, she realized something. The world might not always understand love that looks different, but she did. And as far as she was concerned, that was enough. Claire knew falling in love with Daniel wouldn't be easy, not because of him. He was thoughtful, kind, the kind of man who noticed when her shoulders tensed and asked about it in the gentlest voice. No, it wasn't Daniel that complicated things. It was everything outside of him. The world had a way of looking at wheelchairs like they were cages, and at people like her, walking beside them as either saints or fools. She wasn't either. She just loved him. But love doesn't exist in a vacuum. It started with the stares. They were subtle at first. Prolonged glances at restaurants, in parks, from strangers who tilted their heads just a little when they saw her hand in his. Then came the comments. Polite on the surface, but dipped in condescension. "You're such an angel," one barista said after watching Claire help Daniel adjust his gloves. Claire had smiled then, but it clung to her like static. She wasn't an angel. She was a woman in love with a man who happened to use wheels instead of legs. The people closest to her didn't make it easier. During lunch with Maggie one Saturday, Claire finally shared the news. He asked me to marry him, she said, trying to suppress the nervous flutter in her voice. And I said yes. There was a pause just long enough to hurt. Maggie blinked. Wow, that's fast. Claire stirred her pasta, heart pounding. It's been months. Yeah, but are you sure? Maggie's voice softened like she was speaking to a child. Claire, I mean, you won't be able to hike again, or dance at parties, hospitals, caregiving. It's going to be a lot. Claire looked up. I'm not marrying a lifestyle, I'm marrying a person. I know, I want you to think about forever. Those words sat in Claire's chest like wet cement. Forever. Not in fairy tales or vows, but in ramps and elevators that didn't work, in people who asked her what he wanted to eat. She hadn't thought about all of it. Not until now. That night, Claire lay awake, the bedroom dark and quiet, except for the soft hum of rain tapping the windows. She loved Daniel. That much was certain. But now her thoughts spiraled. What if she couldn't handle it? What if love wasn't enough? Meanwhile, Daniel was fighting battles of his own. What Claire didn't know was that he'd already started training. Weeks before the proposal, he had reached out to Dr. Whitaker, a neuro-rehabilitation specialist known for pushing the boundaries of what medicine dared to promise. Daniel had asked a simple question. Is it possible for someone like me to stand, even briefly? Dr. Whitaker had replied without hesitation. Not to walk a marathon. But if you're willing to suffer, truly suffer, maybe, for seconds. That was all Daniel needed to hear. 3 mornings a week, before Claire even opened her eyes, Daniel was already in the car with Terrence, his lifelong friend and now secret accomplice, heading to the outskirts of town. The sessions were brutal. Muscles that had long forgotten their duty screamed with every attempt. Sweat soaked through his shirts. His fingers trembled from gripping parallel bars. But he never stopped. He didn't tell Claire, not because he wanted to lie, but because he didn't want to raise her hopes. If it failed, he'd still be the same man she loved. But if he succeeded, just for one moment, he could give her something she'd never expect. A man who rose for her, even for 5 seconds. Back at home, Claire was adjusting to a different kind of discomfort. Wedding planning had begun. Venues, florists, music. But something in her shifted. She started noticing how stylists suggested dresses with short trains, just in case, how photographers subtly asked if they should avoid full-body shots. Nobody meant harm, but the message was always there. You're marrying someone who sits, so you must learn to lower your expectations. One evening, after a long day of backhanded compliments and polite pity, Claire broke down at her grandmother's kitchen table. Evelyn poured tea, sat beside her, and said nothing at first. Just waited. I don't know if I can do this, Claire whispered. Tears caught in her throat. Not because I don't love him. God, I love him. But because I don't know if the world will ever stop looking at us like we're a story they pity instead of a life we chose. Evelyn reached over, wrapping her weathered hands around Claire's trembling ones. Sweetheart, she said, voice steady, every love has its fight. Yours just happens to roll on wheels instead of walk on feet. But it's still love. Don't let anyone else write your ending for you. Claire looked at her grandmother and felt something settle inside her. A quiet knowing. The kind that doesn't come from certainty but from faith. In him, in herself, in what they had. Meanwhile, across town, Daniel sat on a training mat. Legs trembling, back aching, eyes shut tight against the sweat dripping into them. Dr. Whitaker stood nearby, arms folded, watching him collapse for the 3rd time that hour. You sure about this? The doctor asked. Daniel didn't hesitate. I have to be. And in that shared silence, her fears, his fight, their love grew stronger, inch by inch, breath by breath. Neither knew exactly what tomorrow would bring, but both had decided to show up for it anyway. Claire had always believed love was about presence, about showing up when it was easier to walk away. And Daniel? He showed up in ways most people never would. He remembered how she liked her tea. 1 sugar, no milk. He sent her playlists that matched her mood before she even told him how she was feeling. He never rushed her silences, never interrupted her stories. But in the weeks after the engagement, Claire noticed something had shifted. Not in their love, but in Daniel. He'd become quieter. Not distant, but distant adjacent. Sometimes when she called, it would go to voicemail. When they were together, he smiled, laughed even, but his eyes seemed to be holding something. One afternoon, she asked him gently, "You okay?" Yeah, he said too quickly. Just a lot going on with the wedding stuff. She didn't push. She trusted him. But the truth was, Daniel wasn't just busy with wedding plans. Every morning before sunrise, while Claire still slept, Daniel rode with Terence to the clinic an hour away. There, he met with Dr. Whitaker and stood, sometimes only for seconds, sometimes with so much pain he nearly blacked out. But he kept showing up because he wasn't training his legs. He was preparing his soul. For a moment, for her. It wasn't about ego. Not for Daniel. He didn't want applause. He didn't want to walk again just to prove something to the world. He wanted to stand just once, so that when Claire walked down the aisle, he could rise to meet her. Not because she needed it, but because he wanted to give her the kind of memory that could silence every whisper, every stare, every half-smile that said, "Poor girl," behind her back. The therapy sessions were grueling. Each step was a war. His body, unused to bearing weight, rebelled with every twitch. He vomited more than once from the strain, bruised, bled, cried in silence. But he never told Claire. Instead, he smiled through their dinner dates, helped her glue tiny pressed flowers onto handmade invitations, and rehearsed their vows with steady breath and steady hands, even as his legs trembled from exhaustion. Meanwhile, Claire was fighting her own silent battles. Her friends were supportive, but still curious. Maggie, especially, had softened since the engagement announcement, but Claire could feel the unasked questions behind her eyes. And even when no one said anything, the world said plenty. Vendors paused when they realized who the groom was. Stylists suggested wheelchair-friendly layout options without being asked. Even the caterer asked if Daniel would need special seating accommodations, as though he were attending as a guest rather than starring in the story. Every time, Claire smiled politely. Every time, something inside her wilted just a little. One evening, as they walked, or rather rolled around a quiet lake trail, Daniel paused beneath a willow tree. The late spring sun filtered through its curtain of green, painting his face in gold. "Do you ever think," Claire began, her voice barely above a whisper, "that I might get tired of this? Of not walking beside you?" Daniel didn't flinch. He didn't sigh. He simply turned to her, eyes steady. "I think about it every day," he said. Claire looked away, ashamed. But he continued, "Not because I don't believe in us. I do. But because for a long time after the accident, I believed everyone would leave. And most of them did. But you didn't. You stayed." She blinked back tears. "I'm not going anywhere." "I know," he said, voice almost breaking. "That's why I can finally breathe again." That night, back at her grandmother Evelyn's house, Claire pulled out an old leather scrapbook. She began filling it with photos of the two of them in the library, sipping coffee on rainy days, dancing in their kitchen with only upper bodies swaying. On the last page, she wrote a note. "I never imagined I'd fall in love with someone who couldn't walk beside me. But that's only because I never imagined love could be this steady, this kind. You showed me that strength doesn't live in footsteps, it lives in staying." She wrapped it in a ribbon and gave it to him the next morning, just before heading out to finalize the cake flavors. Daniel opened it after she left. He read every word, touched every photo, and when he reached the end, he wept, silently, shoulders shaking, clutching the book like it held his heart. Because now he wasn't just training to stand. He had to stand. For her. For them. Later that week, during a training session that left him breathless and soaked in sweat, Dr. Whitaker crouched beside him, concern etched into every wrinkle on his face. "Daniel," he said seriously, "you can't push this too far. One wrong step, one fall, you could re-injure your spine." "I've done the math," Daniel whispered. "One fall won't kill me, but missing this moment, not trying, that might." Dr. Whitaker stared at him for a long moment, then nodded. "Then let's give her the moment she deserves." And so, between shared silences and secret suffering, Claire and Daniel moved closer to a wedding no one would forget. A day built not on fairy tales, but on quiet vows, impossible dreams, and a love that never asked for more than the truth. The morning of the wedding broke with a kind of stillness that felt sacred. The sky was a soft, endless blue, and the lake by the venue shimmered like glass. Wildflowers nodded in the breeze. The air carried the scent of spring and something else, anticipation. It was as if the world itself had paused to hold its breath for Claire and Daniel. Claire stood in the bridal suite, staring at her reflection. Her dress flowed like mist, simple and graceful, chosen not for grandeur but for ease, something she could kneel in beside Daniel's chair. Her hair was pinned with delicate white blossoms, her lips painted a soft rose. Yet her hands trembled. "You look like you stepped out of a dream," Evelyn whispered, wiping a proud tear before it could fall. Claire smiled but didn't speak. Something inside her felt restless. Daniel had been distant the past few days, disappearing for hours, brushing off questions with charming distractions. It wasn't coldness, it was purpose. But she didn't understand what for. Across the venue, in a quiet wooden cabin, Daniel sat in front of a mirror. Terrence, his best man, helped adjust his tie with trembling fingers. The braces beneath Daniel's tailored black suit were tight, hidden, heavy. His arms ached, his legs had barely slept. "You sure you want to do this?" Terrence asked, not referring to the vows. Daniel stared at himself. He looked pale, his lips dry, sweat already rising along his hairline. But his eyes were steady. "I've already done the hard part," he said. "I fell in love. Now I just have to rise into it." Outside, the guests began arriving, their voices hushed with curiosity. Claire had kept the ceremony small, just family and a few close friends. Maggie arrived with a bouquet of tulips and tearful eyes. She hadn't always understood Claire's choice, but now, watching the venue glow under the late morning sun, she felt a shift in her heart. Soft music began, guitar strings and the faint murmur of a violin. Bridesmaids glided down the aisle in pale gold dresses. The ring-bearer wobbled with his little pillow. Then the crowd hushed. Claire appeared. Gasps rose softly around the rows of white chairs as she stepped into view. Arm linked with Evelyn's. Her dress caught the light with every step, her face calm, but her eyes searched. Not the crowd. Him. Daniel was at the front, seated as expected. But something about his posture was different. He wasn't resting, he was preparing. The officiant's voice rose. "All who are able, please rise for the bride." And Daniel moved. Quietly, deliberately, he reached for the hidden stabilizer bars built into his custom chair. Terrence knelt beside him in case he faltered. Daniel gripped the braces, exhaled slowly, and pushed. For a moment it was as if time refused to pass. Then he stood. The first few rows gasped. A ripple of surprise surged through the crowd. Claire, halfway down the aisle, froze. Her bouquet dropped. Her hands flew to her mouth as tears filled her eyes in an instant. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. All she could do was stare at the man who wasn't supposed to be able to stand. But there he was, shaking, straining. Glorious. Daniel locked eyes with her. He didn't smile, he burned. Every ounce of pain, every moment of doubt, every whispered no from doctors and friends, he was defying them all. Not to be heroic, not to prove anything, but to love. And then he took a step. Claire collapsed to her knees mid-aisle, her body overtaken by sobs, hands covering her face. Then she stood, almost on instinct, and ran, dress billowing, hair coming loose, barefoot by the time she reached him. She wrapped her arms around his waist, shaking, crying, laughing all at once. "How?" she whispered against his chest. "How did you?" Daniel held her close, his entire body trembling. "For you," he breathed. "I wanted to give you one moment the world said I never could." She looked up at him, mascara smudged, eyes shining like dawn. "You've already given me everything," she whispered. "But this is a miracle." They stood there like that, just holding each other, while the crowd wiped tears, while the musicians played through trembling fingers, while the officiant waited with reverent silence. No one moved, no one dared. Eventually Daniel sank slowly back into his chair, exhausted but victorious. Claire knelt beside him, hands still in his. The ceremony resumed. They exchanged vows, his voice shaking, hers steady. They promised not just to love, but to stay, to believe, to choose each other every day, even when the world didn't understand. And when the moment came, "You may kiss the bride." Claire leaned in, but Daniel stopped her. He braced himself once more and lifted just enough to meet her halfway. Their lips touched, and the crowd erupted. Applause, tears, cheers. But Daniel didn't hear any of it. All he felt was Claire, and the promise they'd just sealed in front of everyone who had ever doubted what love could look like. Later, under the blooming canopy, Evelyn whispered to her granddaughter, "That wasn't just a wedding. That was a resurrection." Claire smiled through her tears. She couldn't have said it better herself. That night, beneath a canopy of stars and the soft hum of laughter from the reception tent, Claire and Daniel sat in silence just beyond the glow of the lights. The lake behind them shimmered in the moonlight, rippling gently as if even nature had been stirred by what had happened that day. Claire's bare feet rested in the cool grass. Her ivory dress wrinkled at the hem from all the kneeling, running, and dancing she hadn't planned on doing. Her hand rested in Daniel's lap, fingers entwined with his, still grounding herself in the moment. Daniel was quiet, not out of fatigue, though his muscles throbbed in places that hadn't hurt in years, but because he was still holding on to it. That moment. Those seconds where he stood, and the world tilted just enough to change everything. His legs ached, sure, but his heart was full, nearly bursting. He looked over at her, her hair undone, eyes dreamy with leftover tears, and he whispered, "Did I surprise you?" Claire turned to him, her cheek already cradled on his shoulder. "You didn't surprise me," she said softly. "You proved me right." He smiled, but it trembled. "Right about what?" "That love doesn't have to look like anyone else's. That miracles don't always happen in churches or hospitals. Sometimes they roll in quietly, and when they finally rise, the whole world watches." Daniel swallowed hard and kissed the back of her hand. Neither spoke for a while. They didn't need to. The rest of the evening flowed in gentle waves, guests telling them how deeply moved they were, friends whispering that they'd never seen anything like it. Even Maggie, mascara smudged, had pulled Claire into a hug and said, "I was wrong. You didn't settle. You soared." But the real moment, the one Claire would remember years later, came when Evelyn clinked her glass and stood for a toast. The tent hushed. Candles flickered. Claire leaned in, knowing her grandmother didn't speak unless it mattered. "I've seen a lot in my life," Evelyn began, her voice strong and clear. "I've watched the world change in ways I never imagined, but I've never seen anything like what I witnessed today. I saw a man rise, not just to his feet, but to his calling, and I saw a woman choose him, not because of what he could offer, but because of who he already was." She lifted her glass. "To the kind of love that doesn't wait for permission, to the kind of strength that doesn't always come with muscles, and to the kind of moment we'll be talking about until our grandchildren's grandchildren ask why their hearts suddenly feel so full." Everyone stood, raising their glasses high, but Claire's eyes stayed on Daniel, who looked away just briefly, too overwhelmed to meet her gaze. She reached over, cupped his cheek, and brought his eyes back to hers. "This is what real looks like," she said. Later, as the crowd dwindled and candles burned low, Daniel found himself alone in the quiet of their new shared apartment. Claire had gone to change out of her gown, and he sat by the window with a glass of water and a letter in his lap. It was the one she'd written the night before the wedding. Folded neatly, her cursive soft and slanted. He read it again. "My Daniel, if I had 100 lifetimes, I'd choose you in every one. Not for what you've overcome, but for how you make me feel in the quiet. You are my steady, my breath when the world feels tight, my reason to believe that home isn't a place, it's a person. I know the world will always have opinions, but I also know this: no one sees me the way you do. And that's enough to carry me through anything. Love always, Claire." Daniel closed his eyes, the letter pressed to his chest. Not long after, Claire joined him, barefoot and in a simple cotton robe. She sat beside him, tucked her legs under herself, and leaned into him like gravity knew where she belonged. "You okay?" she asked, stroking his arm. "I'm more than okay," he whispered. "I'm home." They didn't talk much after that. They didn't need to. The night spoke for them. Wind through the trees, a soft creak of the floor beneath them, the whisper of the world, returning to normal. But for Claire and Daniel, normal had changed. It now meant something richer, deeper. It meant effort, understanding, and choosing each other, every day. In the months that followed, people would ask them how they did it, how they ignored the doubts, how Daniel stood when he wasn't supposed to, how Claire knew he was the one. They never had a simple answer, because theirs wasn't a story built on grand speeches or fairy tale perfection. It was built on quiet mornings, handwritten letters, and the fierce belief that love isn't about walking in step, it's about standing beside each other, however you can. And Daniel? He did the impossible, not because he had to, but because love gave him the strength to believe that maybe, just maybe, impossible was only a word people used when they'd stopped trying. Claire never needed him to walk. She just needed him to be the man who would rise for her. And he always would. Thank you so much for staying with us until the very end of this heartfelt journey. If you're still here, it means this story touched something deep inside you, just like it touched us while sharing it. What can we learn from Claire and Daniel? That love isn't about appearances, perfection, or even walking side by side. It's about rising for each other in the ways that matter most. It's about choosing someone again and again, no matter what the world says, no matter what obstacles stand in the way. True love doesn't need legs. It needs heart and courage. We'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop a comment and tell us your city or country. We have a beautiful community here and would be honored to hear your story too. And if this story moved you even a little, please hit that subscribe button so you never miss another one. We share stories just like this, raw, emotional, and real, every week. Because sometimes, all it takes is a single story to remind us of the power of love. See you in the next one.